Hello ladies and gentlemen, Gabester here. This is the Heroic Iron Reaver guide. And this fight, just like the first one, Hellfire Assault, is quite easy. Very easy mechanically, there's not much to think about. Everyone's going to be attacking basically one mob at any given time. You will get a few adds later in the fight, but they're spread apart for the most part. So it's almost all single target damage. And as usual, you need 2 tanks and a good mix of healers and DPS. Healing requirement on this fight is very low, just like the first one, so you can have a little bit less healing than you might need later on in the zone. The fight plays out in 2 different phases. You initially engage in the ground phase, where the boss is tanked. Tanks will be alternating, moving away from the raid frequently, while the rest of the raid is spread out at least 8 yards from one another, as close to the boss as they can comfortably get, to allow them to dodge the various mechanics easier. Once the boss reaches full energy, he will take off and fly around the air for a minute. During this flying phase, you can attack the boss, but you will have to dodge ground effects, again, just like you did in the first phase, and also kill off a series of bombs. If left up too long, the bombs will explode and deal pretty significant damage to the raid. Once he lands, then you proceed back to the ground phase, and this process repeats until the fight is over. So as mentioned, you start in the ground phase, and you want to have your tanks generally keep him where he starts or in the middle of a room. And this will allow the raid as a whole to spread out from each other, but also spread around the boss. The reason that you want to spread but be close to the boss is that you want to be able to easily dodge the 2 main attacks, the cone attacks in this fight that he uses. And because they're conal shaped, of course, they're going to be wider the further away from the boss you are. It means you have to move more distance to dodge it, the more distance you have between yourself and the boss. So do your best to try to be closer to the boss if at all possible, while maintaining an 8-yard distance from the rest of the raid. The main 2 attacks that you're going to be dodging in the normal ground phase here are Barrage, which he's using right there. So he will face toward a random raid member. And after a few seconds of casting, he will shoot a cone of fire that will hit anyone that it touches with a little explosion, and it will leave a patch of immolation on those positions. So, again, if you're closer to the boss, you simply sidestep this, whereas if you're further away, it's going to be a farther distance to run to get out of it. The other thing you're dodging is Blitz, which you just finished using there. This is also going to go in a direction toward a random raid member. And after a moment, he will blitz or charge toward them in a straight line going across nearly the entire room, and then he will turn around and blitz back a second time. So again, you want to be closer to the boss, ideally, so that you can sidestep this effectively. Other than that, though, the blitz is not a cone attack, so to speak. It's just a straight line. So your distance on that one doesn't matter quite as much, but you just have to be aware of it and ready to sidestep. One small tip for the barrage is that he will sort of step back slightly when he's starting the animation, and one of his feet, his left foot, will be forward slightly. You can kind of use that to gauge the center point of the cone attack, where the barrage cone is going to go out. Now, you also need to be spread at least 8 yards from everyone else in this ground phase, because he will frequently cast Unstable Orb. This will target a handful of random ranged players, and these people will have a small explosion at their location, hitting themselves and anyone within 8 yards, as well as leaving immolation patches. So, obviously just stay spread out from one another, but again, trying to be as close to the boss as you comfortably can be to make it easier to sidestep Barrage. As we loop back to the beginning again, the final 2 mechanics in the ground phase are Pounding, which the boss uses fairly infrequently, but he will essentially just do raid damage to the entire raid during this duration. We've seen this mechanic on XT002 in Ulduar, and of course many other bosses after that. Nothing really special to do here, but healers may want to consider using cooldowns to keep the raid comfortably topped off during this. The final ability is a tank mechanic in the ground phase, and sort of a raid mechanic in the flying phase, and this is Artillery. So in the ground phase, this is cast on the current tank that has the boss, and they will have a 12-second debuff applied to them. After the 12 seconds, it expires, and the tank will explode, dealing damage to the entire raid, but this damage is reduced the further players are from the tank. So again, you see mechanics like this from Imperator Margok in Highball and other fights as well. The basic idea is that your tanks need to swap the boss very frequently during this ground phase because of these artillery casts. They actually start to cast more frequently than the 12-second duration. So essentially what it means is the first tank that gets artillery, which is my job here in the footage, will have to run out as the other tank taunts. And as soon as that explosion goes off, that tank that was against a wall to kind of limit the damage that the rest of the raid takes needs to come back quickly and taunt the boss back immediately. The off tank at the time will already have an artillery applied that may have 7-8 seconds left by the time the taunt happens. So the second tank needs to run out very quickly to find a safe position to get away from the rest of the raid. And again, you want to try to get roughly as far as you can within reason. You can arguably run across the entire room and get 50 or 60 yards away. While the damage to the raid will be very low, it will be almost impossible for you as a tank to get back into position to retaunt before your tanking partner has to run out. So try to find a happy medium. We were trying to do roughly 30 to 40 yard distance, again depending on the angles and the position of the raid. But the damage is not too high if you're 30 yards away from other people. So as mentioned, once the boss reaches 100 energy, he will go into the air phase. During this period, there's really no point in attacking the boss. He takes 95% reduced damage, so trying to do damage is almost worthless. Instead, you just want to focus on survival and dealing with the bombs that he will drop around the room. So positioning is key. You can opt to sort of spread your raid in assigned quadrants of the room to help you deal with the bombs. But it just depends on your competence and overall DPS, whether that's necessary or not. The main ability he will use is Fuel Streak. He will basically fly across in one straight line around the room, across the room rather, and create a long streak of fuel on the ground that will snare players that touch it. Then any immolation fire that exists that is touching any patch of that fuel streak will ignite the entire line of fuel and create immolation patches in those positions. So you can see there the fuel is being ignited, and now there's immolation in that position. So dealing with this is just simply a matter of getting out of the fuel streak so that it is not converted to fire and doesn't light you on fire. Pretty simple to do. Once it is lit on fire, you can actually run through a line if you need to. There are enough gaps that you can safely do so. You just have to be careful. So if you have to get one from one side of the room to the other, it's possible to do so. Other than that basic mechanic, he will also drop the bombs as mentioned. So these fire bombs are just distributed randomly around the room. Generally, they're going to be off by themselves, though. And the goal is for the entire raid to kill every bomb before it is destroyed. It takes about 25 seconds for it to detonate. So if it is not destroyed in that time period, it will explode and deal a huge amount of damage to the raid. On normal in particular and a little bit on heroic, you can afford to have one bomb go off. But if you have two and especially three that are not killed in time, go off at the same time, the raid's going to die. So, as mentioned, the goal is for DPS to kill these bombs efficiently and effectively. If you need to spread out your raid into rough quadrants, so you split your DPS accordingly, that's perfectly fine to do. It just depends on, getting practice on this fight and seeing if that's necessary. The other mechanic that you'll have to deal with during this air phase is that he will use artillery on random raid members and not just once on the tank, since there isn't a tank at the time. So usually it is 3 raid members. It may depend on your raid size, I'm not exactly sure. But the basic idea is still the same. Those 3 or so people targeted with artillery need to do what the tanks did in the first phase, which is move to the edges of the room, away from one another and away from the rest of the raid, to reduce the explosion damage the raid takes. Generally speaking, if these 3 people go to opposite walls from one another, forming a triangle or something like that, the damage to the raid is going to be minor at best. It's very low. The key thing, as mentioned, is to make sure that they don't stand on top of one another, potentially kill each other, and other than that, are on the edges somewhere around the room. There's plenty of space. The last thing to keep in mind is when the phase ends, when the boss reaches 0 energy, he will choose a random position around the room and land there, casting a falling slam effect, which is just a giant circle. And pretty simply, you just don't want to stand in that. If you stand in that, you'll probably get one shot. It's a huge amount of damage without, basically an immunity or something like that. But it's pretty easy to dodge, so you just have to watch for that and be aware when he's about to come down, not to stand under him. All right, now DPS tips for this fight. You'll want to spec for single target damage. Again, there are very few adds, and usually they're not clumped up, so it's all about single target burst. For the ground phase, you want to stand close to the boss, but at least 8 yards spread out from one another, so you can sidestep barrage and blitz attacks. And then finally for the air phase, DPS will want to disperse around the room so you can quickly kill the bombs before they explode. And make sure you run to the wall if you get the artillery debuff on you. Tank tips are very simple. You just want to watch out for artillery on the ground phase. When you get it, run out about 30 yards from the boss and the rest of the raid against a wall whenever possible, and then prepare to quickly get back because you'll have to taunt the boss for a tank swap, since your tank partner will generally have artillery before you actually get back into melee range. So don't be afraid to taunt at range, and try to move the boss as little as possible while you're doing so, however. Finally, simple tips for healers. Make sure you use your cooldowns for pounding during the ground phase. This is where the raid will take the majority of their damage. During the air phase, just like DPS, disperse healers around the room to ensure that everyone in the raid is covered by at least one healing player. This is particularly important if someone gets artillery and they don't have a way to recover their own health. So that about does it. It's overall a very simple fight, as I mentioned, just like the first fight, Hellfire Assault. Really, this fight is all about spreading out 8 yards, getting close to the boss, dodging barrages, dodging blitz, and then your tanks managing the swaps for artillery. As always, good luck. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.